than doing that, why don't we just sit down and agree? Because after that, there will be sanctions, there will be consequences for such behavior, of course, in the future. Lastly, I'd like to say we can use targeted protectionism, which I think Naomi had mentioned. Targeted protectionism without full trade barriers. So this one is a very important lesson because it really and greatly enhances our our trade and ensures that we are benefiting maximally from from trade. Yes, back to you, Naomi. Or to James.
All right, yeah. I think it seems like we lost Naomi. Hopefully she'll be back soon to continue um, with the discussion. And thank you so much for the input. And yeah, I think one of the most critical things that we have to do or try to balance is particularly on protectionism, and with both sides arguing either for or against. I think it's good for government and to be able to balance these policies. I'm trying to get to the question by Naomi. I think that was a question number two, and I think we are getting a sense in which we should be, or rather, trading policies within countries should be focusing on having at least more open borders. Yeah, I can see what lessons can be learned from historical trade practices. How can they be addressed? And I think when you look at the whole texts and from Imon Butler, at least you can see the progression of trade, or how trade as it has been. And yeah, Naomi is back. Yeah, so historically, I think the question that we are trying to respond is how have we evolved from governments being so protective of themselves and what they do to a point where now we are embracing more open borders, more reduced barriers to trade and so. Karibu, welcome back, Naomi. Please continue. Naomi, if you can hear me. Okay, it seems that I'm yet to get her. So let's move to chapter one, and I don't know guys. I don't know who is going to take the next question in chapter two. And generally, Yaman Butler is exploring Adam Smith's concept on voluntary exchange, and largely just highlighting, both parties, both sides, how people benefit from trade, and especially if you are talking about countries, because they value goods differently with challenges. Um, they value goods a lot more, and what you are getting is that trade is no longer a zero sum. It's no longer a zero sum game. And the example that is given is of a pin factory, with the illustration of how labor is divided, and how it increases productivity significantly, improving the whole output for different country. And here's where specialization comes into play. This is where the comparative advantage of nations, as described by David Ricardo, comes into play, suggesting that countries should focus on producing goods they make, that they are able to make more efficiently than others, even if they are skilled in other areas. And these are the benefits of that that we are seeing, that if one nation is able to concentrate more on what they are good at producing, and then acquiring, or rather buying from another nation on any other area that they are better at. So I want us to move now to the questions. I don't know who is going to take the following question. The next question is the following: what are the implications of trade policies on income inequality within and between nations? Um,
Okay, I think I can take it. If
okay.
James is not with me.
Um, let me try to add more. Let me try to add more guys so they can be able
Okay.
to take up the question. Let me add Moses and James Musioka. So anyone, let me repeat the question again, so that whoever is able to respond can. What are the implications of trade policies on income inequality within and between nations? I guess all of you now are able to respond. Someone?
Okay, thank you. Let me proceed and let me first introduce myself. My name is James Musioka from Catholic University of Eastern Africa, a final year student pursuing Bachelor Economics and Statistics. Now, going to the question, let me start by saying this, that trade policies shape income distribution both domestically and globally, and that
James,
theoretically.
you're not audible enough, James. Please, if you could speak up.
Okay, let me restart again and start by
Oh,
saying that first, can you hear me?
yes, yes, you're good to go.
Okay, let me start by saying that trade policies shape income distribution both domestically and globally, and that theoretically and historically perspectives reveal mixed perspectives about the trade policies put in place by different governments and different countries across the globe. And when I was looking at the question, I divided it into two parts. The first part, I looked at the policies within a nation, and the next part was the policies between nations. So let me take you through the policies I discovered within the nations, the policies, the trade policies within a nation. The first one was trade policies based on skilled based effects, that free trade often benefits skilled workers in advanced economies. In this book, we come across a certain part where we are being told that advanced economics often tend to take advantage mm, of labor productivity, which is low from LDCs, less developing countries, and that the the policies which should be put in place within a nation is that a country should ensure that their labor is skilled, to ensure that the free trade is not biased on one side, that the scale between LDCs and developed countries and economics are balanced. The next policy was based on sectoral shifts, where export-driven sectors export grow, increase wages, while import competing sectors may decline, leading to job losses. Now, based on this, I back up with the point that Adam Smith tried to explain in the mercantilism era that in uh, in trade we both have losers and gainers, and in losers it's not all about we are losing something. He went ahead and said that trade is a zero sum game where we have to gain or you have to gain, the other one has to gain. You're gaining by buying, the other one is gaining by selling. One is gaining a commodity or a service or a good, the other one is getting the extent, which is might be in terms of money. Then I will say the other policy is pardon me, uh, hmm, that social safety nets, education, and retraining programs can help mitigate. No, pardon that. That education retraining programs can help mitigate inequalities based on policy solutions. Now, going to the trade policies between nations. I started by comparing developed and developing economics, where trade trade liberalization can widen the income gap between high income and low income countries. If weaker economic struggle within industrialization, yeah, and then between nations, the trade policies within nations, that terms of trade and dependency between the nations must be considered when setting trade policies to be placed. That historically, many developing nations have revealed and exporting raw materials. Country like Kenya, which relies on exporting raw materials and then importing the finished good, while importing value goods, preferring an equal trade relationship. And then fair trade and global convergence, where institutions like the World Trade Organization and trade agreements can help ensure more equitable trade relations. Yeah, thank you.
Naomi, if you can take over. All right. The next, I'll proceed to the next question as we try to get Naomi back. Naomi, if you can hear me. Okay. I'll try to get her back. The next question, how can nations leverage their comparative advantages in a globalized economy to ensure that to enhance trade relationships? I'll read that again. How can nations leverage their comparative advantages in a globalized economy to enhance trade relationships? Oh yeah, Naomi. Yeah, Naomi is back. Okay.
We can proceed maybe with a question that you had asked. Stephen, could you go first? Then I think we'd have Moses. I think Mosioka is left.
Okay. Thank you, Naomi. So this is how nations can leverage their competitive advantages in a globalized economy to enhance their trade relationships. So again, we are looking at the universe, rather the planet. We are looking at Earth as one market. So how we can leverage their competitive our competitive rather comparative advantages is by one specializing and maximizing in industries that we excel in. So, say for instance, Germany is well known for producing automotives, rather production in the automotive field, and perhaps India in the pharmaceutical field. So, by as Adam Smith and David Ricardo had really tried to emphasize, uh, if we focus specifically on the production of what we can do best, which takes us back to the question that was asked in the book by Norman Butler. Why should you produce something more expensively than you than okay so expensively while you could go to another country, buy it, and come back to your country, produce something else, and sell it to another country at a price that would be uh, relatively cheaper to them but more expensive to you. So if in Kenya perhaps, okay, rather let's go to Germany. For instance, if Germany is producing the Volkswagen brand, and Germany can sell one Volkswagen, let's say Passat, which is a brand of a car, which is a type of a car for, let's say, okay, in Kenyan shillings, let's say 2.3 million. But then it realizes that Kenya will produce this same car at a higher price. So, okay, Germany will sell the car in Germany at 2.3 million, but Kenya will use more to produce the same car and perhaps sell it locally at, let's say, 3 million. So Germany comes to Kenya, tells Kenya, we can produce this car, but we'll sell it at 2.6 million or 2.7 million. So Germany ends up selling the car at a higher price, making a greater profit, but Kenya buys it at the same price, but a less, which happens to be less in in terms of what they would have used to produce the same car. So by specializing and maximizing on these industries that they excel well, these countries are very well able to focus and rather to benefit from global trade. Secondly, by forming strategic trade partnerships, countries are also able to gain from trade. Now, using the same example of Germany and Kenya, you have to study and understand uh, how production is being done globally. Again, looking at the world as one market, you're able to understand how it is done globally, how production is done globally. Then evaluate what can I produce so well and what can another country produce better than I am. In that way, the country is able to leverage on its comparative advantage, making now by approaching those countries to form these said strategic uh, trade partnerships, our countries are able to maximize and get as much, uh, rather make as much profits as they can from trade. So this improves market access by removing trade barriers. So if I am able to spot that Germany produces cars so efficiently, I eliminate or rather bring down the trade barriers for importing cars to Kenya, and they will similarly bring down the trade barriers of produce of rather exporting the good that we produce comparatively or rather relatively cheaply to their countries. Thirdly, upgrading products by value addition instead of trading in raw materials. In fact, this is a point that has one been emphasized very well in the book, and two, it's a thing that has been mentioned so many times, especially on mainstream media, the radio and TV, that Kenya is a country, perhaps, if we look at Kenya, which produces tea and coffee very well. In fact, it has some of the best quality in terms of tea and coffee. Our country can be able to, should be able to manufacture and perhaps upgrade the product. So by adding value, which has also been done, and we've seen this being done in our country, especially on the in the central region where milk production has been forced, or rather has been pushed towards, okay, milk producers have been pushed towards increasing the quality and adding value to the quality. So instead of selling milk directly into our markets, we can sell milk products. We can get ghee, we can get cheese, we can get yogurt, which can sell at a higher value. Which brings me to my fourth point, which is equipping human capital with the skills. So if we are able to teach our population, our human capital, on one, how to produce things very efficiently, effectively, and gain value, perhaps by minimizing costs, maximizing which maximizes profits. Now, if we teach the population, the human capital, on how we equip them with skills on how to add value to our products, then that is one way of by which we'll be able to get maximum value from our comparative advantage. Lastly, by encouraging innovation and technology transfers. Now, by technology transfers, I mean looking at countries that can produce the same goods, but they are doing it better than us. What you study, you benchmark and learn what they are doing better and how they are doing it better. And by transferring that technology, it becomes so much easier for us as a country and any other country to leverage their advantages, their comparative advantages on a global level. Yeah, that's it for me. Thank you. Back to you now.
Thank you so much, Steven. I can't add more on what you just said. I think you've given, a perfect explanation on how nations can leverage their comparative advantage. Um, I will end with Moses' remarks at the final end. Maybe we can go to the next slide, which is chapter 3, our final chapter. Next slide, chapter 3. Thank you. So, chapter 3 mainly discusses about winners and losers in trade. So, economic change through trade creates both winners and losers as it stimulates innovation and competition, but also disrupts industries and displaces workers. Advancements in technology and shifts consumer preferences, leading to the decline in demand for certain industries. Let's say, for example, maybe in around 2002, 2003, we were not using we did not have the technology of using phones, maybe to get very good images. Right now we have that, so it kind of erasing the essence and importance of having cameras, although it's very important, but now the importance has decreased because of the advancements in technology. Trade can exacerbate income inequalities, but it can also increase consumer choice and lower prices, benefiting the poorer citizens. So, the modern implications that we find from chapter 3, the first question. Next slide, please. What strategies can be employed to mitigate the risks associated with reliance of global supply chains? Allow me repeat. What strategies can be employed to mitigate the risks associated with reliance of global supply chains? I don't know if Stephen, you are ready to address that question. Uh,
Can you hear me?
Stephen is up. Yes, Stephen, you're
Yeah.
up to answer the
Okay.
first question.
Thank you, Naomi. So the strategies that can, excuse me, the strategies that can be employed to mitigate the risks associated with reliance to global supply chains. Uh, First of all, you need to understand that the risks that are behind reliance on global supply chains, and this has been really pointed out well in the book. And I'll give an example. there is the mention of the COVID-19, where globally the Chinese were heavily relied upon in supplying, especially of medical supplies. And then another example is the war between Russia and Ukraine. Before that, countries like uh, right in Africa, there's Egypt that had pretty decent amount of wheat being imported from Russia and Ukraine, which caused a little bit of a scandal, or rather a mess in in uh, in their supply. So to mitigate such risks, because if Russia and Ukraine go into war, or COVID-19 happens and it strikes China, uh, our country, or rather, let's say Egypt, is not exactly in China. It is nowhere close to China. It is nowhere close to Russia, but it is going to be affected directly, because mainly because we are looking at the world at this point. We are looking at the world as one market, as I had said. So what do we do to ensure that these downturns and these up and downs in political stability and whatnot uh, do not exactly uh, do not exactly affect our countries as much as they would if we had no backup plan. So first, enhancing, okay, rather making politically stable allies in terms of trade, and being very strategic with whatever a relationship we are creating is very important. For instance, let us look at a country like the DRC Congo. This is a country that has a history of being uh, very, very volatile in terms of the political stability. There is war once you find out that there is war, or there is a change in government. So there is a lot that is happening, and you'll notice that, of course, if you depend on the DRC Congo, perhaps for timber or for lumber, which is in abundance there, by not being very strategic, if your only source of timber or lumber is DRC Congo, you will suffer at one point or the other. So a country has to be very strategic while choosing its trade partners, which takes me to my second point, which is diversification of suppliers and markets. Now, if you notice that, of course, there is the great advantage of trading with the DRC Congo, because if we're looking at timber and lumber, or timber, any product that is to do with forests, anything to come from forests, DRC Congo will produce it because they have an abundance of it. So it's going to be very cheap, but you have to diversify your suppliers, because if by any chance, for instance, if by any chance Egypt was buying wheat from Ukraine and Ukraine alone, then Ukraine is hit in or gets entangled in a war with Russia, and they are unable to export wheat to Egypt. So the prices of wheat in Egypt, of course, the law of demand and supply, the, there is little supply, and of course the demand increases, and the prices go up as well. So it becomes quite a pickle. So every country has, okay, a country should be very, as much as you're being strategic, while you're being strategic, second thing is diversify your suppliers, so that if one is affected, you have an alternative. And lastly, I think it is important, and it has also been mentioned in the book, that countries can use local production of critical goods, highlights on critical goods. So if we understand that the staple food perhaps of Kenya is the staple food of Kenya is maize, and we know that for sure, if we do not have maize, well, we do not have supplies of maize in abundance in our country, there is definitely going to be a problem. So what do we do as a country? We ensure that we can produce maize. So the government can bring in subsidies. For instance, you've seen the government bringing in subsidies uh, of fertilizer, so that maize can be produced in abundance. So in so doing, we can, one, trade in our maize, export it when we have it plentifully, and two, ensure that we are not hit by the downturns of political instability from our suppliers. So those are the strategies that I can suggest that can be employed to mitigate risks associated with reliance on global supply chains. Back to you now.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for your remarks. Allow me highlight some of the comments you've mentioned. You've mentioned that we should invest in our local production. A fact is, when we have subsidies for our local manufacturers here in the country, we can be able to create a buffer against global supply chain disruptions and also reduce the dependence on imports and enhance economic resilience. Allow me maybe highlight, you also mentioned diversification of supply sources. You also mentioned strategic in choosing allies or partners. Maybe one thing you may not have mentioned is you can strengthen our trade agreements such that we have a robust trade agreements, that we have provisions for emergency responses when we have crises, which can ensure that our supply chains remain intact even when we have crises in the country. Allow me go to the next question since Musyoka is not with us. How can countries balance the benefits of trade with the need to protect vulnerable industries and workers from job displacement? Stephen, you can go.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. So this is on how countries can balance benefits of trade. Let me just read the question again. How can countries balance the benefits of trade with the need to protect vulnerable industries and workers from job displacement? Now, the book really explains, I cannot emphasize this enough. It has a very in-depth explanation of these, uh, these perspectives. For instance, in
We have lost you, Stephen. Okay, Stephen, if you can hear me, please proceed. Seems he's not audible. Mhm. Stephen, Musyoka, if you can maybe address the second question, please. Stephen is off. You're on.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. And let me start by saying that balancing the benefits of free trade with the needs to protect vulnerable industries and workers is a key policy challenge for many countries and economies. And for free trade, because free trade promotes efficiency, economic growth, and economic changes. It also promotes consumer benefits, but it can also lead to job losses and social dislocations in sectors that face foreign competitions. And now, the how can countries balance the benefit leads to the strategies in which the countries can use to achieve this balance. And one of the strategy is by implementing targeted trade adjustments, which we call them TTA, the TTA, whereby the government can offer training programs, income support, and job placement services to workers placed by trade. Let's say, for example, the United States was the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program provides financial assistance, skills training, and relocation allowance to workers who lose their jobs due to import competition. And for this, many manufacturers work in the Middle West impacted by trade liberalization. Uh, for example, we can look at the NAFTA. The NAFTA. We're eligible for targeted trade adjustment assistances support to transit into new careers in healthcare, the IT, and other growing sectors like the manufacturing sectors. And this implementation of targeted trade adjustment will help workers adapt and re-enter the labor market rather than remain unemployed and underemployed. This leads to the next strategy where the government may use safeguard measures. These safeguarding measures uh, may be temporarily imposing tariffs and quotas to protect industries, the infant industries, from sudden import surges, which may lead to their collapse. And for this, let's use again the example of steel safeguards in the US back in 2002, where under the president of that time was President George, where he imposed temporary tariffs on imported steel to protect domestic steel, facing competition from cheaper steel from importations and excuse me. So he imposed these tariffs to protect infant industries and also uh, the domestic based industries in the US back then, dealing with the steel production, facing stiff competition from cheap foreign steel. And these safeguarding measures will always provide breathtaking rooms for vulnerable industries to restructure or improve their competition. And they can also be they grow they grow domestically. The other strategy which I highlighted was the government promoting industrial upgrading and innovation, whereby the government can help industries modernize their subsidies, their research grants, innovation policies, and this will help them to compete globally. Now let's look at an example of Germany, or the middle settlement support. That is the small and medium-sized enterprises in manufacturing had faced global competition, but the government in Germany uh, imposed policies promoting vocational training and also innovation funding, technology adoption, which help them remain competitive in the global market and in the global trade. So Germany had supported advanced engineering sectors like precision machineries and green technologies. And we can say that this helps the industry to move up value chain and avoid decline due to foreign competitions. Now the other strategy which I highlighted was for domestic government supporting regional development and economic diversification. The strategy implies that the industries and local government to invest in domestic and economic diversification and infrastructure development in regions hit harder by trade-related job losses. So this leads to us to an example in UK around the Northern Powerhouse initiatives, where the UK launched the Northern Powerhouse to stimulate investment and job creation in northern regions. These regions were like Leeds and Manchester, and that experienced deindustrialization due to globalization and trade liberalization. And this includes the transport infrastructure, and we can say also innovation hubs and business support. But of course, all these in UK promoted in support of the infant industries ensured that they create alternative sources of employment in areas formerly dependent on declining industries. Uh, the other The other strategy is government ensuring that they implement gradual trade liberalization, where phases in free trade measures over time to give industries and workers time to adjust. We adjust to new technologies, new products in the market. Like before, we can say back then, people used to trade barter trade. Those time, the service trade was not more conversant with the global trade, but now people are conversant with the service trade and is the most growing sector in the trading sector. And now, by implementing gradual trade liberalization, uh, they ensure industries and workers time. They give them time to adjust. The same people had to adjust from, let's say, for the example given the book, from using donkeys as transportation to using now cars and taxis, cabs, all that. Now, for example, you can say the China World Trade Organization Association that was around 2001 when China joined the World Trade Organization. That many sectors in developing countries feared competition from China's export, including the US. And in response, countries like India and Brazil negotiated transitional periods and tariff reduction schedules to give local industries time to become and more competitive before full liberalization. And of course, this prevents sudden shocks to domestic industries and labor markets. And lastly, I can say the last strategy that I highlighted was local government to encourage social dialogues, whereby the dialogues involve labor unions, employers, government in decision making on trade and labor policies. Like in Kenya, we can say the country should be involved now in terms of the labor unions. That's where in Kenya we could go to. But now, encouraging social dialogues. I take you for an example in Nordic model in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, where Nordic countries combine free trade policies with strong labor protection and active labor market policies and social welfare systems. For example, the Sweden country embraces a open trade but supports workers through comprehensive unemployment insurance and training programs negotiated through agreements. And these agreements will always lead to maintaining public support for free trade and openness in trade while ensuring social protection for affected countries. Thank you. Thank you, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Mosioka, for your remarks. Allow me invite Moses. Moses, kindly just give your general view of the book. Don't have necessarily to answer the questions. Just give a brief overview of your understanding about the book. It's highly appreciated. Yeah, Moses.
All right. Confirm you can hear me.
Yes, you are audible. Proceed.
All right. First of all, I think those that came before me have done fantastic job in this. I'm Moses. I study and apply economics in day-to-day life. So I'll just have like four key areas to tackle by talking about what where did trade come from, how do we, between protectionism and trade, do we need a balance or what are we supposed to do into that? Uh, what does comparative advantage really tell us in terms of trade? And then what are the risks that trade poses to us? Uh, Generally, reading the book, it's a fantastic read, and for people who believe that we need to let the economy speak for itself, I feel the author clearly puts that out there and elaborate why that needs to be the case. But anyway, the history of trade. trade and life are almost synonymous in this case, because what necessitates trade is actually life itself. And think about anything. Think about your phone, your dress code, your favorite entertainment, whether it's music, movies, or just what you do. We realize that society is made up in a way that there's no possibility that all of us can actually produce everything we need at a particular time. And with that basis of life, then it necessitates that at all points of life, we must trade. We must have uh, a point of exchange between what are we producing, what somebody else is producing, and we need it, and then we have to exchange. So as long as life exists, then there will be that point of need for trade. So it's trade started, of course, at a very domestic level where people who are near each other were exchanging, and then the world became more complex, and then there was need to exchange between people who are at far points. And that's very necessary because, again, like we can just point out to our own life that there are things we really need to make our life have some dignity. And for that to happen successfully, then we have to buy from others and we have to sell the excesses of what we have to others, which which is really necessary. So when you look at the approach of trade and, well, even coming home to our own country and asking ourselves, have protectionism be used here in Kenya? And then you realize that the fact is that even in our country, we hear people say we have very young companies, we need to protect them so that they actually can survive for a while. We will hear some people say that some countries are producing cheaper goods and therefore it's a risk for us if we allow them to bring them to us. One of the most contentious thing in international trade is that most country has very restrictive rules about agriculture and exchanging that. So there are so many bases under which country actually employ protectionism, whether it's security, whether it's protecting uh, their young industry, whether it's trying to grow their own economy. But we have to ask ourselves, are those grounds really substantial? So let's assume this. We want to protect a young company, so we decide we won't buy anything that is produced by that company into the country so that this company can be able to service the market. So what are we trying to do here? Number one, companies producing maybe at a higher level than this young company can able to sell at a lower price. They are more efficient. And we all know the basic of economics that we don't have enough resources to ensure that we have the laxity of using the resources just we want. If we use resources in one particular thing, it means we are denying another. That's one of the risks we are placing ourselves at in this case. So is there a way that we can actually protect our young companies without necessarily messing up with trade? And economics actually provide for those. For example, we could give them tax holidays, which would enable them to retain the amount that they could have given up on tax to ensure that they push the company to efficient. And why the risk of protectionism is one, it can be politically abused, whereby people in power protect companies that they're associated with. And what that does is it makes, because you're producing at a lower efficiency, you're using more resources to do this production, then the cost of what you're producing is actually higher than it could have been if we were allowing those who produce at a lower cost to actually bring their goods into the country. Number two is what you're doing, you're limiting the amount or the pool of choices people have, the consumers have. See it this way. If Africa was decided, okay, will never allow trade outside Africa. Ask yourself, could Africans be having phones? And somebody would say, okay, maybe we need to start producing our own phones. And then ask ourselves, maybe to produce one phone, which is produced in different parts and mostly assembled in China, in the global price, maybe it's, let's say it's $5. I'm not saying that's an exact figure. And then let's say in Kenya, it will take 30. Is it worth it that we start producing phones in Kenya? Or should we just buy them? This whole concept demystify people who try and say, okay, protectionist is protecting our economy, to protect our consumer. Most of the time, when we actually put up protectionist approaches, we harm people. For example, with Trump now in the US, analysis have been done, and every increase in tariffs is increasing the cost of buying things by $1 to the American people. So life is becoming more expensive to them. They have to pay more. And then by the US is assuming it's protecting its people, but in the real sense, it's also harming them. So protectionist approaches actually harm people it intends or it's supposed to protect. And that's the risk behind it. And again, a very clear example is agriculture system in Kenya. We have seen several billions of money being given as gift to bail out some agricultural production in Kenya because they have been protected by government. So they are actually producing at a very inefficient point. They are making losses. And then now we have to actually take more money and pump into them to protect them. So for example, let's assume we have to bail out the sugar industry by 10 billion. What does that do? This 10 billion could have been used to do another thing. So some trade-off has been done and some people's welfare has been damaged, or we need to increase taxes at some point to actually protect these companies, which are doing things in an efficient manner. Whereas we could just have decided, okay, maybe Kenya or whatever these producers are doing are not doing it efficiently. What can they do better? And can we focus our energy in that? And coming to comparative advantage, well, if you read the theory of economic complexity and comparative advantage by Ricardo, you realize that more complex economy have greater advantage in trade because they're able to produce more sophisticated products and at a very higher level. So trades allow economy to get disrupted, and once they get disrupted, they tend to move at a higher level. One of the reasons why some of the developing countries' economies have remained adamant at very low productivity, it's because they are really protected. And then what that does to it is people live in the cocoon of safety of this is what we've been doing, we'll keep doing this, and we have lobbying power, government will always protect us. And we refuse to adapt to new mechanism of doing things, and then it leaves us at risk. But all the same, we all must agree that trade can place some people into risks. What if we depended on people for food and then they decided, okay, this year we won't supply them with food? What happens at that instance? But also, trade has an answer to that question. And this is the reason why all countries, if they are to maximize on trade, what it will mean, each and every country or each and every part of the world will have a comparative advantage by themselves. And therefore, we'll have a web of interdependency whereby, well, this country may be producing better at this, but we also have what we are producing better. So we have to exchange. Therefore, even if they decided to hold our throats and say, okay, we won't do this, it necessarily does not mean that they will not make any losses or they will not have any disadvantage because we also have the power of what we produce. And again, the world is quite complex now, and we have mechanisms and tools and bodies to help tackle scenarios whereby people use trade as a weapon. That's why we have United Nations, we have WTO, which try and bring to minimize this conflict. If I was asked, I think even if, and we are seeing this case, the world is, major countries are now looking inward. We can see the US is doing that. We have seen Europe try, say they were going to do retaliate tariffs to US and all that. Even the more countries try to look inward and to protect themselves within the cocoon of their safety of their borders, opening up to trade is more advantageous. It improves productivity. It's likely to lead to higher incomes. Well, in the short run, we might have to disrupt and close down some of the industry, but in the long run and in the medium term, we'll do much better. So I am for the fact that we should have more freer markets, we should have more free trade, and we should keep urging and passing education to the society on why trade allows us to actually function at our best. Thanks, Naomi. I think I'll end it at that. And thanks for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Moses, for your remarks. Maybe I'd highlight. I'd like. I have loved the point you brought up about the weaponization of trade. Something maybe we hadn't discussed before. I think we can wind up right now. Musila, if you are here, maybe you can finish up the session. Hello. Yes,
All
Musila.
right. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Kindly unwind the session.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. Yeah, I'm grateful to each one of you. I'm also grateful to KEFSA and the IATP and IEA that have made it possible for us to be able to print the books on Introduction to Trade and Globalization here locally in Africa and in Kenya. And yeah, I want to express my gratitude really because cross-border trade is one of the major focus of our work, and particularly trying to see how much we can be able to open our country to trade externally, largely under the African Continental Free Trade Area and the East African community. And so it's good for us to begin to have these conversations and try to make a case for ourselves as to why is it morally right for us to be able to open our borders and to reduce the various trade barriers that we have in trade and such things. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Kesa, for making sure that we have our speakers who are ready to present today. And it was a great learning process for everyone, I want to believe. Yeah, we might have had earlier on a mix up with our, I don't really know what happened with our streaming link. I could see that we were online, but guys were not able to join up, but we were able to fix it later on. So thank you so much. We've covered, I think, 3 chapters of the book, and I hope that the KESA team and our team will be able to agree on when we can be able to do a session again, and also try to have a session that will focus on the initiatives for trade, for open trade borders that we have in Kenya, or rather in Africa, that Kenya is party to, and we can look at, for example, the East African community and the African Continental Free Trade Area, and I think recently we have the tripartite agreement between the East African community, COMESA, and SADC. I believe we can have also a session on that to try and look at how it fits into what we are discussing, what Eamon Butler is bringing out in this book. and then maybe we can be able to look at the various trade protocols that are contained in the various agreements. So thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who missed the session, I think it's only fair that we share the link for them, for whoever needs to check or rather to rewatch the session to be able to do it. So it's one of the main issues that why we chose to do it on YouTube, because it's easier to just retrieve whatever recordings and videos, materials that we had. So thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that we'll be seeing you next time. Have a good night, and see you next time, everybody. Thank you.